The only real certainty about your life is that you are fundamentally, tragically, wrong about it. This isn't a motivational bumper sticker. It is the central operating law of human perception, a law codified not by Silicon Valley programmers, but by an Athenian named Plato, 2,400 years ago. We often discuss The Matrix as if it were a clever piece of postmodern science fiction, an intellectual thought experiment about artificial reality. But Plato did not write a thought experiment. He wrote a psychological diagnosis of the human species, explaining why we desperately need a cage, and why, if the door were left ajar, we would slam it shut and lock ourselves back in. Plato's allegory of the cave is not about being fooled by shadows cast by a fire. That interpretation is too simple, too forgiving. The true horror of the cave is the psychological mechanism that forces the prisoner to define reality by noise, echo, and reflection alone. The cave is merely a physical manifestation of what I call Plato's filter, the universal human mechanism that prioritizes cognitive comfort over existential truth. It dictates that whatever is easiest to process, whatever confirms the current tribe's consensus, and whatever requires the least amount of painful self-revaluation will automatically be designated as real. This filter guarantees that the vast, terrifying, beautiful complexity of objective reality is preemptively censored before it ever reaches consciousness. You do not see the world. You see your security system's report on the world. And this is where Plato becomes terrifyingly predictive of the 21st century. The prisoners in the cave were not stupid. They were optimized. They developed an entire social hierarchy based on the efficiency of identifying and predicting the movements of the shadows. They perfected the art of the superficial. This is exactly what we have done. We have built a civilization based on optimizing superficial metrics, confusing high-definition shadow projection for profound reality. Our shadows are now delivered on 4K screens, algorithmically optimized to confirm our biases, and designed with unprecedented psychological precision to keep our necks firmly craned toward the wall. The chains of the modern cave are not made of iron. They are made of personalized validation, distraction, and the comforting consensus that if everyone else is wrong, at least you are not alone. The greatest defense mechanism of the human mind is the absolute conviction that other people are the prisoners, never you. This is the ultimate self-deception that keeps the system running. If you are tired of the shallow, flickering answers that mainstream thought provides, if you suspect that the real story is always hiding just beneath the surface, then you need to commit to following the path out of the echo chamber. Subscribe right now, because the path to genuine insight requires that you consciously choose to miss none of the subsequent, painful, liberating steps. The critical difference between Plato's time and ours is scale. When Plato wrote, the shadows were locally manufactured. Now the shadows are centrally manufactured, disseminated globally, and so numerous that they completely saturate the visual field. We are not just watching the shadows, we are living inside the projection room. The Matrix, in its modern iteration, does not require sophisticated machines or energy harvesting. It requires only the willing submission of billions of minds, choosing comfort over clarity. Think about the moment a prisoner is dragged, kicking and screaming, out into the sun. Plato knew this moment wasn't one of immediate ecstasy. It was excruciating. The light, the truth, is physically painful, blinding, and disorienting. The first reaction of the freed man is profound anger, and a burning desire to retreat back to the familiarity of the dim, manageable wall. He doesn't want truth. He wants his former sight back, even if that sight was fundamentally flawed. This is the psychological barrier the truth always faces. It must overcome the innate human preference for stability, even if that stability is built on a lie. We don't just fear the unknown, we actively despise the destruction of the known, regardless of how false the known proves to be. This resistance is why true philosophers are often hated, sometimes killed, and perpetually marginalized. They are the unwelcome reality check for a species addicted to the dark. The resistance is not merely intellectual, it is ontological. The profound psychological suffering that prevents the average person from accepting the light is rooted in the fact that the lie is not a separate thing they hold. The lie is the scaffolding of their selfhood. Think of identity as a complex structure built entirely of acquired beliefs about their morality, their political alliances, their career choices, and their perceived social status. If you introduce a fundamental truth that demolishes even one major supporting pillar, the entire structure shakes, threatening total collapse. This feeling is not experienced by the brain as a correction. It is experienced as the literal, immediate threat of ego death. The psychological defense mechanism that erupts in response is not logical. It is primal, screaming that the external threat, the truth-teller, must be silenced, destroyed, or mocked back into irrelevance, because the alternative is the terrifying unmapped void where the self used to be. The ultimate suffering we flee is the terror of having to rebuild ourselves from scratch, armed only with uncomfortable facts. We are fundamentally wired for efficiency, and nothing is more cognitively expensive than realizing that the last 20 years of your life were predicated on a foundational error. This is why the suffering of the masses is chronic, low-grade, and self-inflicted, yet perpetually chosen. It is the suffering of knowing, deep down, that you are participating in the absurd, but calculating that the social and internal cost of stepping out of line is too high. The moment you decide to break free of the centrally manufactured shadows, you break the implicit social contract of the cave. The currency of the cave is consensus, and the price of that consensus is your critical intelligence. The crowd doesn't tolerate the truth because the truth requires them to abandon their investment in the lie. Every person still chained believes, unconsciously, that they gain social safety by maintaining the illusion for everyone else. Therefore, the independent thinker is not seen as a hero. He is seen as a vandal attempting to strip the wallpaper off a condemned building, exposing the rotten wood beneath, and thus threatening the neighborhood's property values. This pathological defense mechanism against reality means that those who refuse the comfort of the lie must be prepared not only for self-doubt, but for absolute social exile. If you find value in essays that commit to this dangerous marginalized analysis, content that refuses the easy consensus and instead investigates the structural integrity of your own perception, then you need to actively support this infrastructure. Hit that subscribe button, because the creation of challenging, deep-dive thought requires explicit protection from the tyranny of the comfortable click. The profound tragedy is that the lie offers a predictable form of unhappiness, the pain of the cave, the endless scroll, the existential anxiety, the political outrage that evaporates into nothingness, is familiar, manageable background noise. It is the suffering of being perpetually distracted, which is preferable to the intense, acute, transforming suffering of genuine clarity. Clarity hurts immediately. Confusion just hums quietly in the background. a perpetual, low-frequency drone that requires no immediate change in behavior. The mind is a spectacular procrastinator, always choosing the path of least immediate resistance, even if that path leads inevitably to deep, long-term rot. We are addicts of the known misery. When the truth is presented, it demands immediate, irreversible action, the rebuilding of the self, the severance of comforting relationships, and the acceptance of a terrifying level of personal responsibility for one's own vision. This demand for immediate, total responsibility is the most unbearable psychological burden of all, and it is the final, invisible chain that keeps billions staring intently at the wall, forever preferring the predictable misery of the shadow puppet show to the blinding, exhilarating agony of the authentic sun. The truth does not set you free by magic. It frees you by giving you the painful tools to excavate your own prison, brick by bloody brick. The psychological architecture of modern life is designed, intentionally or not, to facilitate this escape from individual gravity. We have engineered entire intellectual systems whose sole function is to provide the alibi for failure. If the truth demands total responsibility, then the lie must provide total systemic acquittal. Look closely at the dominant cultural narratives of the last decade. They are magnificent, cathedral-like frameworks of externalized causality. The job of the modern intellectual has become the professional manufacturing of comfortable reasons why you are not to blame. Your failure to launch, your persistent dissatisfaction, your inability to connect or create enduring value. These are not failures of character, discipline, or vision, but artifacts of an invisible, monolithic, oppressive system. This systemic critique is the ultimate psychological amnesty. It functions as a powerful, addictive salve, allowing the individual to remain perfectly passive while believing they are engaged in a grand, revolutionary struggle. You do not have to clean your room, improve your skills, or face the painful verdict of your own mediocrity. You only have to correctly identify the external oppressor that is holding you down. This is why the discourse of systemic blame metastasizes so rapidly in fragile, educated classes. It is a high-status excuse for personal stagnation, a sacred narrative of structural incompetence that replaces the terrifying mandate for self-correction. The most brutal real-world example of this comfort addiction is the way millions now embrace the victim identity not as a temporary state of acute suffering, but as a permanent, high-value status. The moment you define yourself as a victim of forces beyond your control, be they historical, social, or neurological, you have successfully outsourced your agency. You forfeit your power. Yes, but in return, you gain infinite psychological relief. You are no longer accountable for outcomes. The lie confirms that your potential remains pristine, untouched, merely trapped beneath layers of institutional injustice. This narrative offers a profound sense of moral superiority without requiring moral effort. It demands no painful self-inventory, no terrifying acceptance of the fact that, perhaps, the most immediate and profound resistance to your progress is internal. The cost of this intellectual alibi is steep, however. By defining your problem as external, you simultaneously define the solution as external. You must wait for the system to change, for the powerful to grant you permission, for the revolution to materialize. And in that eternal waiting room, your life force drains away, comfortable but profoundly powerless. The lie whispers, you are good, but paralyzed. The truth screams, you are paralyzed. Therefore, you are nothing but potential that has chosen inertia. This kind of analysis, which commits the heresy of pulling apart these protective, high-status narratives, is inherently dangerous and financially unviable within mainstream structures that depend on mass comfort. We are digging in the trenches of self-deception here, excavating the painful reality beneath layers of comforting cultural mythology. If you want this platform to continue providing the tools to dismantle your own comforting lies, if you believe there is value in content that dares to call the pervasive victim narrative the psychological sedative it actually is, then this is the point where you make the necessary commitment. Support this deep content. Hit the subscribe button and signal that there is an audience hungry, not for validation, but for actionable, painful, transforming truth. The ultimate tragedy is that the lie of systemic oppression and external blame guarantees that the individual remains deeply dependent on the very systems they claim to despise. If the system is the source of your problem, then it must also be the source of your eventual salvation. You become intellectually and emotionally chained to the object of your hatred, needing its existence to justify your own paralysis. The person who insists that their failure is entirely due to the machinations of the external world is trapped in a permanent, perverse codependency with the concept of oppression. They have made their bondage their identity, and they will fight viciously against anyone who attempts to hand them the keys. The keys are always stained with the blood of hard work, self-doubt, and the terrifying realization that perhaps the cage was unlocked all along. The ultimate crushing responsibility is the burden of realizing you are free to change right now, and that the only thing stopping you is the profound, entrenched comfort of the chains you refuse to slip off. The greatest deception woven into the fabric of modern life is the lie of therapeutic comfort, a soft, seductive narrative that has successfully rebranded responsibility as trauma. We have traded the stoic burden of endurance for the hypersensitive demand for immunity. Modern therapeutic culture, often disguised as radical empathy and radical self-care, is in fact the sophisticated architecture of eternal immaturity. It teaches that the discomfort caused by one's own inadequacy, the natural pain of failure, effort, or limitation, is not a signal for necessary change, but an injury inflicted by the external world, requiring perpetual protection and a sanctuary from reality. This sanctuary is termed the safe space, a designation that perfectly captures the psychological demand for a zero-friction existence. But a zero-friction existence is a reality where nothing can ever move, where no force is strong enough to spark growth, and where the self becomes an artifact, preserved meticulously in emotional formaldehyde. You are not healing, you are simply archiving yourself. This culture demands we replace confidence with self-esteem, mistaking an earned outcome for an unearned right. Confidence is the earned byproduct of repeatedly mastering difficult, often frightening tasks. It is the knowledge, forged in the heat of successful effort, that you can execute necessary action. Self-esteem, conversely, is the unearned, manufactured declaration of inherent worthiness, designed primarily to distract from the gnawing absence of accomplishment. When the external world fails to validate this manufactured worth, the individual is not inspired to work harder. They are instructed to blame the world for its lack of affirmation. This cycle produces a populace that is simultaneously arrogant and cripplingly fragile, convinced of their exceptionalism yet unable to endure the slightest contradiction. They are psychologically optimized for complaining, not creating. They seek to manage their vulnerability through linguistic and systemic barriers, rather than eliminating the vulnerability through competence. they have defined growth down to zero. This is the kind of analysis, deep, relentless, and unforgiving, that the mainstream cannot sustain because it actively threatens the multi-billion-dollar self-help industry built on the principle of perpetual dissatisfaction and gentle affirmation. We are not interested in feel-good philosophy. We are interested in operational truth, and operational truth often involves a painful confrontation with the self you have meticulously engineered to avoid. If you are tracking this argument, if you recognize the cold, hard necessity of this kind of intellectual excavation that refuses to pull its punches, then subscribing right now is the simplest signal you can send that this depth is worth fighting for. Support the difficult discussion. The deep psychological addiction to this fragility is rooted in the fact that suffering, when reframed as trauma, elevates the individual to a position of moral authority they could never earn through mere achievement. It is a shortcut to status. To be deemed a survivor of overwhelming forces is often more socially valuable than to be deemed a master of one's own domain. This status confers an unchallengeable right to perpetual grievance and an exemption from the terrifying obligations of self-mastery. The identity becomes defined by what has been inflicted upon it rather than what it has chosen to become. This is the profound, final tragedy of the modern, coddled psyche. It has traded the difficult glory of becoming something exceptional for the easy comfort of being declared perpetually injured. They have weaponized their own wounds, and in doing so, they ensure those wounds can never truly close. The ultimate freedom lies in realizing that your past pain is a data point, not a destiny, and that the only true authority you possess is the authority to choose your response right now. The reluctance to release the anchor of injury is not merely a cynical bid for social capital. It is a profound, almost thermodynamic defense mechanism against the overwhelming terror of radical self-responsibility. We are constantly seeking to reduce the variables of our own existence, and nothing simplifies life more effectively than the assignment of blame to an external, immovable force, a past event, an unjust system, or a broken childhood. If the origin of your current limitation is outside of your control, then your failure is guaranteed, but simultaneously, your effort is excused. This is the sinister comfort of determinism. The human psyche will always prefer the known prison cell of a guaranteed narrative, even a painful one, to the infinite anxiety-inducing open field of true freedom, where success is difficult and failure is entirely your own fault. The trauma identity offers a stable, unshakable plot line in a chaotic universe, and in doing so, it shields the individual from the truly terrifying confrontation, the realization that the primary variable in their future, the final deciding factor in whether they live a consequential life or a quiet, frustrated one, is not the past, but the quality of their current, moment-to-moment effort. To internalize this is to step onto a high wire without a net, and most people, when faced with that choice, will gladly trade their potential greatness for the safety of the victim's narrative, perpetually looking backward and declaring, "I would have succeeded had it not been for this permanent structural damage." This is the ultimate trade, the exchange of destiny for alibi. This kind of deep structural analysis, tracing the philosophical sickness back to its psychological root of responsibility, avoidance is intensely uncomfortable because it insists that your current dissatisfaction is not evidence of the world's injustice, but a direct consequence of your own choices made over time. If you find this unrelenting approach to the truth challenging your internal comfort zone in the exact ways it needs to be challenged, if you recognize the necessity of this intellectual pressure, then supporting this channel by subscribing is the only vote that counts. We rely on people who prioritize operational truth over gentle affirmation to keep this kind of difficult content alive and thriving. The perpetuation of this narrative necessitates a constant, subtle devaluation of self-efficacy. If you truly believe you're capable of solving a problem, the problem ceases to confer status. It simply becomes a task to be executed. Therefore, the fragility mindset requires you to strategically undervalue your own competence so that every minor setback can be interpreted as proof that the overwhelming external forces are still at work. This is the maintenance ritual of perpetual injury, actively seeking evidence of oppression, not to overcome it, but to confirm the identity derived from it. When everything is perceived through the lens of harm, the world shrinks into a hostile, predictable place where personal effort is irrelevant, and only recognition of one's suffering is valuable. We have replaced the concept of virtue, that which is earned through difficult action, with the concept of innocence, that which is declared through recognized suffering. This flight from competency has infiltrated every arena, from academic discourse where intellectual rigor is mistaken for aggression, to personal relationships, where honest feedback is rebranded as violence. The tragic irony is that in their obsessive quest to feel safe, they have eliminated the only true source of safety: personal strength and psychological robustness. The truly dangerous human is not the one who denies that pain exists, but the one who understands that pain is the raw material, the fire from which strength is forged, and they refuse to stop entering the forge. They realize that the only person capable of truly destroying you is you, and conversely, the only person capable of saving you is also you. What happens when this pathology is injected into the circulatory system of a major institution? We get a crippling operational paradox. Consider the academic world, the supposed citadel of intellectual rigor, which has become the perfect microcosm for this flight from competence. A university, structurally, is designed to generate intellectual friction, to test ideas, to tolerate disagreement, and to withstand the emotional discomfort of being wrong. Yet today, the highest operational priority is often the elimination of perceived offense, treating discomfort not as a necessary catalyst for growth, but as a structural failure that must be immediately remedied. This has led to the absolute inversion of meritocracy. When intellectual rigor is equated with aggression, the system stops rewarding the person who solves the problem and starts rewarding the person who successfully flags the perceived intent behind the question. The result is a total institutional paralysis, where administrative energy is diverted entirely to internal purity tests and bureaucratic performance rituals, leaving the core mission of education and research to wither. We witnessed this play out in brutal public detail when institutions began prioritizing psychological safety above all else, defining that safety not as the confidence derived from competence, but as the fragile absence of intellectual challenge. This mindset is perhaps best exemplified in the corporate sphere by the mandated, obsessive documentation of harm reports over actual productivity metrics. The highest status internal commodity is now the perfectly crafted grievance, a document that proves the purity of the claimant's suffering and demands the immediate reallocation of institutional resources toward mitigating that specific, perceived threat. This shifts the internal incentive structure entirely. Why labor for 10 years to invent a solution when you can gain immediate social and managerial validation by expertly articulating your victimhood? Competence is a long, uncertain game. Declared suffering is instant social currency. The internal reward system has been flipped from output to input, from solving to signaling. You become more powerful by demonstrating how much the system has wronged you, rather than demonstrating your capacity to operate effectively within the world, regardless of its injustices. The truly devastating consequence is that these institutions cease to be places where strong people are trained. They become elaborate, high-cost theaters for the performance of communal fragility, rendering them unable to respond effectively to genuine external threats or complex, real-world problems. They have traded their capacity for resilience for the comforting illusion of untouchable innocence. They mistake the silence born of terror for genuine safety. The ultimate betrayal of the self, therefore, is this voluntary surrender of personal agency to the external system, expecting the system to manage your internal landscape. This mindset is fundamentally totalitarian because it delegates the most crucial aspect of human experience, the capacity to make meaning from pain, to an administrative body. It creates the ultimate dependent, a psychological prisoner who requires the constant surveillance and judgment of others to validate their reality. To break free of this prison, you must first recognize that the bars are made of your own insistence on external validation. You must subscribe to the principle that intellectual honesty requires discomfort, that psychological safety is built through exposure, not insulation, and that the only person capable of truly destroying you is you. If you understand the gravity of that internal fight, and if you are ready to join a community dedicated to dissecting these deeply uncomfortable truths and rejecting the easy solace of intellectual dependency, then make sure you subscribe right now and hit the notification bell. It is the only way to ensure this deep, demanding analysis continues to reach those who need the pressure of challenge, not the ease of affirmation. The final verdict is unavoidable. We have manufactured a generation that fears the fire, yet wonders why they remain so cold. Strength is not given. It is earned in the crucible of chosen difficulty. The person who refuses to suffer is the one who chooses permanent weakness. The ultimate verdict on our contemporary retreat from difficulty is this: the quest for zero risk is not a path to happiness. It is a meticulously paved road to self-imposed psychological servitude. We are not weak because life is hard. We are weak because we have systematically rejected the necessary preconditions for strength. We have mistaken sensitivity for insight and comfort for security. The fundamental law of existence, which no administrative policy can repeal, is that every organism that seeks to avoid the pressure required for its own growth will atrophy. That is the fate we have chosen for ourselves, and the resulting ennui and anxiety are not symptoms of a broken world, but the predictable consequence of a broken internal ethic. The only true form of safety in a chaotic, indifferent universe is the absolute certainty of your own competence, your proven capacity to confront and integrate the unavoidable hardships of reality. You must become the architect of your own character, and that structure can only be built with materials forged in fire, not handed out in the sterile environment of a sanitized classroom. Stop asking what the world owes you and start asking what you are willing to risk to become the person who is truly capable of standing on their own 2 feet, unflinching, when the inevitable storm hits. The most dangerous drug on the market today is the illusion that someone else, some larger system, can handle your existence better than you can. That promise is the siren song of mediocrity, leading you onto the rocks of spiritual collapse. We must reclaim the intellectual and psychological wilderness we have abandoned. We must understand that your struggle is not a flaw in the design. It is the design itself. Your meaning, your resilience, and your freedom are not found in the systems designed to protect you from the messiness of life, but precisely in your willingness to wade into the center of that mess and define your own terms. Do not seek the absence of suffering. Seek the strength to wield it as the ultimate instrument of personal transformation. The great irony of our time is that in trying to escape our own shadows, we have simply prolonged the twilight. If you refuse the anesthesia of the comfortable masses, if you recognize that the battle for the future is fought inside your own skull, and if you are committed to the rigorous, painful, yet ultimately exhilarating pursuit of sovereign thought, then you must join this community of thinkers. Become a part of the movement that actively rejects the culture of synthetic fragility and embraces the immense responsibility of self-mastery. Subscribe now and stand ready to face the pressure required to finally become whole. The final verdict, then, is simple and terrifying. You are the last defense against your own collapse. The greatest deception of the modern age is the promise of external salvation, that some political movement, some pharmaceutical intervention, or some algorithmic curation can solve the fundamental problem of existence, which is the sheer difficulty of maintaining a coherent, meaningful self. We have mistaken numbness for peace, and have sacrificed the terrifying beauty of competence for the dull safety of compliance. The true crisis of our era is not political, environmental, or economic. It is a profound, cataclysmic failure of character, driven by our refusal to accept the inherent tragedy and glory of personal responsibility. Stop asking to be saved. Start asking to be strong. My final thought, as you walk away from this essay, is this: do not waste your life demanding a guarantee. Demand only the opportunity to test your limits and prove your worth. The universe does not care about your comfort. It only respects your demonstrated capacity to endure. Stop hoping for an easy path and start digging the trench of your own formidable soul. If you are ready to stop outsourcing your existence, if you are prepared to own the magnificent burden of consciousness and achieve true philosophical sovereignty, then subscribe now. Join the few who are willing to look into the abyss, not to flinch, but to find the light switch and finally illuminate the path forward.